Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lives podcast. Today we have Julian Circo, co-founder of Hyfe. Hyfe is an acoustic AI that runs on any phone and detects and classifies any cough. Julian, I'm so excited to chat with you, not only because you have a fantastic name, but also because of your experience as a founder, your background, and also what's really fascinating about a lot of companies like yourself. Like we mentioned before the show, we chatted a little bit about how obviously AI is popularized now with ChatGPT and kind of all these other companies working and really pushing these really intensive and impressive products, but also it's been around for a while. And these technologies have been kind of active. I'm interested in seeing how you've utilized the technology to really kind of do something that I think a lot of individuals don't know, which is really kind of optimizing the ability your phone has to understand your environment, be kind of add some kind of hyper awareness, but also kind of interact with this external environment to really kind of offer a really interesting user experience. But we'll get into all that in a second here. Julian, tell us the audience, just for some context, what were you doing before you started the company?
Hey, Julian, thanks so much for having me. I'm pretty sure our name is one of the reasons why you invited me on the show. And I approve of
100%.
that. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so I'm what you call a serial entrepreneur. And like many entrepreneurs, I've had a non-linear journey.
Yeah.
So I can say I had like 3 careers so far. I've had a pretty intense and highly fulfilling career as a humanitarian worker. So I've spent 10 years or so working mostly in conflict and post-conflict environments. So during the 2000s, I've spent time in pretty much every hotspot that was around in those days, from the Balkans to Afghanistan to East Timor to Cambodia to Congo to Somalia. Very educational journey, of course. I've learned a lot. And ironically, I've learned a lot about entrepreneurship because in environments like that, kind of low resources, low infrastructure environments, people tend to be very creative in the way they use technology, in the way they use what they have at their disposal. So I've learned a lot about that and about just ways that technology can be leveraged to achieve impact at scale.
And so,
And then
go ahead.
yeah,
Please.
no, and I mean, then I've had another career in just running kind of large, complex operations in frontier markets. So I've spent many years in sub-Saharan Africa, building products, sort of trying to open markets for impact products. And that kind of launched me into building my own companies. And I've built a number of them over the years across different kind of categories, from consumer products to fintech and now medtech.
It's so fascinating thinking about how other countries adopt technology and describe for the audience that doesn't know kind of the difference in how technology is in other countries or in hostile environments, being that, for example, India was first able to kind of come online with the mobile rather than on web. And so they've offered such a different experience in how they view consumer products and people engagement and the types of things that they built. What were the things that you saw in terms of the adoption of technology in other countries? And what were some of the applications that were popular that are just different from what we see here in at least in the US?
What always fascinated me is how, like, if you think in the US, a phone is a nice thing to have and it's super convenient, but it's not life changing in any significant way. It's just it changes the quality of our life, but it doesn't affect our life to that extent. Whereas in a place where you don't have access to infrastructure, you don't have access to information, it becomes a key component of the way that you manage your life. Whether in those days, this is before the internet, right? So we're talking early days of cell phones, early days of SMS. People used to use SMSs in ways that in the West, we would have never thought about it. Like everything from groups, people would kind of distribute groups. People would share information by SMS to some sort of person that would then disseminate it using analog means, like down to the level of having like a blackboard with chalk, right? So you receive, think about things like you receive information on the price of whatever produce in the next district. Mm-hmm. And then the guy who receives it is in a tea house or whatever, and he has a blackboard and he writes the price on the blackboard, and people in the community come and see and say, oh, the maize or whatever is cheaper in this district than in the other district. And then they make plans accordingly. If they sell maize, they try to get there. This is the thing that I've been impressed by, and just learning about how people transfer some of the social values into the way that they use technology. Like social networks and things. People would vouch for each other using phones across state borders and across what would be a conflict zone where you could not physically go and see that person.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, that looking back, that kind of launched me on this journey where I'm trying to find ways to leverage technology in ways that haven't been possible or haven't been used or contemplated before.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to think about the speed of the communication and also the type of information that they're communicating with. It's not just a conversation, but it's information. It's downloading of whether it's ideas or groups or, like you said, the vouching system, which is fascinating because a lot of us think about our social network and how that essentially vouches for us as we broaden or expand who we're connected to, who our mutual connections are. But I guess what's different about the direct kind of value of being vouched for someone or having that kind of tool to be so readily available in a conflict zone, for instance, how key is it to get information quickly and use it and then continue to kind of adopt and adapt?
Yeah. And there's another side of it, which is, I think it's a bit more intuitive. And that has to do with the fact that where you don't have legacy infrastructure, it's easier to leapfrog to the next generation of technology. Like if you have, like in the US, you have all this legacy, pieces of infrastructure, but even pieces of sort of contractual infrastructure, what you have with Verizon and T-Mobile, it's really, really hard to leapfrog over that because people are locked into these contracts and there are investments that are made that are kind of hard to get out of at the level of the companies, but also at the level of the users. Whereas if you think of a place like India, there's none of that. So then it's very, very easy to be agile around using the new wave of technology, even if it's not that reliable, even if you don't have the sort of the packages that you'd have in the US, and eventually leading the way with innovation.
Yeah. And what are some ways you've seen in terms of the advancements of at least cell phones or in this type of technology in phones that are allowing at least companies like you, of course, but also other companies to really utilize the technology in there, being able to sense things, being able to monitor, obviously they have I always forget the name, but essentially the sensor that allows you to understand where you are in the world, that almost like a compass, right? What have you seen in the advancement of technology and how phones have been really used to go beyond just communication? What are some things that you've seen outside of obviously what you work, Hyfe and what you're working on?
I think this is a huge opportunity. You have basically very high performance sensors that you have on your person all the time, wherever you are, whoever you are these days, right? Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're in Burundi or in India or in Los Angeles, you have a device on you, at least one, that has a chipset that is more powerful than any computer 10 years ago. And this chipset is connected to a bunch of sensors, which are super precise. They're consistent. They're low power. It's amazing. And actually, I'm amazed I'm amazed we don't see more innovation in this space, right? And initially, you see that like with sensors and with data in general, you have these waves that are kind of the same. First, you can collect this data, but you don't really know what to do with this data. And actually, people who are they're vested in a particular industry, take health data, for example. They're very suspicious of it, right? They say, well, this is just noise. I don't know what it means. I get Julian's heart rate, and now I get Julian's exercise rate, and how many steps Julian's made yesterday. And it's just too much, and it's very noisy, and I don't know what it means. And I can't rely on that in any way because I've been trained to take decision on information that is of a different nature, right? I ask Julian how you feel. I take your temperature. But with AI, that noise, separating the signal from the noise becomes so much easier, right?
Yeah.
And this is like a thesis that I have as an entrepreneur, and I'm betting on this thesis, is that we will be able to handle a lot of noise and find signal in a lot of noise. And I want to build companies and I want to invest into products that operate in that space, because I think that's kind of the next wave, whatever it is, whether it's imaging AI or sound AI or just shifting through a lot of data. This is for me one of the most compelling use cases for AI. You can just consume this huge amount of apparently noisy data and find signal in it. It's super exciting, really.
It's all and thinking about just like the innovation piece that you mentioned, why don't you think companies are innovating more with cellular devices and using the sensors and sophisticated? Is it privacy? Is it challenging? Is it difficult for users to adopt? What do you think are some of the reasons why companies aren't necessarily innovating in the mobile space? Is it less attractive as an entrepreneur if you don't know it? What are some kind of common reasons that you think company or founders are moving away from innovating in that space?
I think there's no playbook, and that can like
Mm.
entrepreneurs like to run with a playbook, and I respect that because
Yeah.
there's so much unknown that you might as well minimize the surface area where you're taking risks.
Right.
So so what you see a lot now is playbooks, people just applying playbooks to different kind of angles. Whereas the opportunities that I'm talking about are more like blue ocean. It's more like no one's ever done this before. So then you have to you have to deal with innovation maybe more than a typical company, right? Like take take my company, Hyfe, right? Like we're basically decoding medical signal out of sound. That's basically fundamentally what we're doing.
Yeah.
But what's the playbook? We don't have one. How do we charge? Can I do a SaaS about this? It's not really. How do I package this as a product? How do like, what's the value is very clear, but how do I deliver this value to a user? And how do I get them to turn on their microphone? And there's
Yeah.
so many points on the journey that you have to innovate, which means that the risk is higher, which means that there are less people playing at it. But we're what I've noticed over the last 3 years that we've built in this company is that we're slowly defining the playbook, and we're kind of
Yeah.
we're the sort of company that build in the open. Like, we kind of share our experiences and stuff. And I'm excited to see a lot of companies that now apply our playbook.
Yeah.
And I'm familiar with several of them, and I'm excited about it because I think that we're there's enough opportunity for more of us, and there's always going to be a differentiator. But what's nice is that slowly we're defining the playbook for this. And then you have a playbook that we kind of pioneered in health sound, but it can be applied in other areas as well.
Yeah.
That's quite
Well,
exciting.
yeah, well, obviously, just to describe the technology a little bit more, we'd love for the audience's context as well. But using essentially sound to decode medical data, kind of what was the inspiration behind that idea, and how have you been able to use the sensors and obviously I have some more questions about that. But please define the technology a little bit more for the
When
audience.
you think about it, there's like imaging is a huge category, right? Like, look, like, let's just focus on medical imaging. Everything from X-ray to MRIs to laboratory work is basically imaging. And AI is proven over the last 10 years to be very, very powerful in that, finding patterns that are consistent with cancer or with some other disease. So
Yeah.
it's a non-controversial big opportunity, and there's thousands of super innovative, clever companies playing in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but imaging has a few issues. Imaging, you need specialized lenses, you need specialized light, you need specialized spectrum. Like, you need infrastructure that is medical to work with imaging, right?
Yeah.
But sound is very different. Sound is continuous. Sound is not, you don't require sophisticated infrastructure for sound. And our thesis was, well, maybe there's medical information, medical signal in sound. And you ask doctors, hey, do you use sound in your evaluation? They use it all the time. They say, can I listen to your lungs? They say, could you please cough? They say, and when you think about it, our bodies produce a lot of sounds. And
Yeah.
we ourselves, without any medical training, know some sound. We can tell bad sounds from good sounds, right?
Right. Right.
But our ears, among all our senses, our ears are super low resolution, right? Like, we
Yeah.
don't have good hearing as humans. But machines are really good at hearing, and machines are really good at processing sound data. And now all of a sudden we're unlocking all this signal in health sounds. And we focused on, I think you can take our playbook and apply it across any number of sounds, everything from snoring to sneezing to
Yeah.
babies crying. But we focused on cough because the most amazing thing to me as a non-medical person is that cough has, the way that we evaluate cough in kind of clinical settings hasn't changed in hundreds of years. Like, if you go now, Julian, in the best hospital in LA and say, look, I'm coughing, you're back in the 16th century. But Julian, how bad is your cough? Well, doctor, it's pretty bad. That's basically the level of evaluation. There's no way to quantify it. There's no way to describe it. You don't have a language to describe it. So we thought this is a great opportunity. And we kind of committed to building tools to support coughers across the journey, all the way from first symptoms to treatment. And it turns out that there are hundreds of millions of coughers out there, people who just cough. And more importantly, there are coughers who don't understand why they cough. And there's no treatment for them, and there's no diagnostic for them. And these are our people. We just build tools for them.
Yeah. It was so fascinating, like how it's able to interpret, but also when you kind of go and categorize the different sounds, how do you go about that process? Do you go and do you apply them to a medical board? And how do you really kind of go through the categorizing process to then understand what cough should be categorized as in a certain subset of potential illnesses versus, asthma or any other kind of medical condition? How do you go through the categorizing process?
So we're doing something counterintuitive, Julian, and it's one of my favorite stories, is that when you start categorizing sounds, listening to an individual sound and trying to analyze it, you're back into imaging limitations. You need to control the quality of the microphone. You need to control the acoustic environment. You need to make sure that the sound is crisp and high quality. But that's not how we operate. If we do that, you might as well go to a laboratory and do a blood test.
Yeah.
But what we've learned is that cough frequency, which is the amount of times you cough over a certain period of time, contains huge chunks of information. And frequency is easier to collect than high quality sounds, because even if it's bad quality, it's a cough. All you need to do is binary. Is that a cough? Yes, no. And that's where we put our efforts. We're the only company that builds tools for longitudinal cough tracking. And it turns out that, meanwhile, over the last few years, there's been a lot of research and clinical trials and peer-reviewed papers that legitimize our approach, because it turns out that there are consistent patterns on the way that you cough over time. And I'm not sure if we use video for this, but I can share with you some incredible images that you can just look at them with just the eyes of a layman and see, whoa, I can see a pattern there.
Yeah. Go
so
ahead,
by just, when you think about cough frequency, think about like an ECG, an electrocardiogram, right? The rhythm of the heart. It's the same. You have these patterns that we're cutting those up and down and if you can correlate those patterns with things like environmental factors, we can basically detect things like a humidity threshold for an asthma sufferer or for a COPD sufferer, which is in plain English, say, if the humidity in your room is above a certain percentage, the risk for an asthma kind of episode goes up 5 times.
Yeah.
There's some interesting research that I can share with you that shows correlation between cough frequency and outcomes in COVID patients, meaning that when people, and this is also counterintuitive, when people's cough frequency goes down, if they're in a critical condition, that predicts negative outcome. They're likely to be intubated or to die, which goes against the common sense, because you'd think, they cough more, that means that they're sicker. But there comes a point where if you cough less, that's basically an alert sign. And you can use this sort of information in very low infrastructure, cheap, easy to scale settings that potentially changes the way that we think about treating respiratory disease. Super exciting stuff.
Yeah. And you mentioned something in terms of obviously defining the playbook, that was one challenge, but also another challenge is adoptability and who essentially is gaining the most value out of a product like this. Obviously there's consumer, I think, value that we can all gain by understanding our environment, but at home and kind of broadly, if we're out in the open, kind of care to identify certain coughs in certain areas in particular. But on the institutional level, what is, outside of doctors keeping track of patients and things like that, what are some creative ways that you've seen in kind of more institutions utilize the information that you're kind of collecting and understanding more so to kind of help with patient outcome? How have you been able to navigate not only the adoption from the consumer side, but from institution side? And what were the challenges that you faced there?
So there's a lot of institutional opportunity, right? And you can think about there are basically two big opportunities with institutions. One is public health. And there we play a significant role. And particularly during the COVID pandemic, there was a lot of excitement on what we do because cough frequency predicts. If you think about cough frequency at an individual level, that's one thing. But if you think about it at the aggregate level, like you take your cough frequency and then you aggregate it with your neighbors and with your neighbors' neighbors, you can actually see heat maps of cough frequency.
Yeah.
Think of it like a Waze for cough, right? And you can see where cough frequency goes above the baseline, right? So then you're like, oh, in this particular neighborhood, there's an outbreak of something, there's some pathogen. And you can think in terms of neighborhoods, but you can think in terms of campuses. You can think in terms of buildings within campuses. You can think in terms of the south wing of this particular building. And that allows you to manage, to basically detect pathogens in real time, which is a bit of it's like a very, very hard problem historically. Because how do you know there's a pathogen? Because you have to first know that there is a pathogen. It's a very hard problem historically. And we kind of solve that just by having real-time cough frequency. We don't know what the pathogen is, but we know that if a lot of people start coughing more than normal, something's going on in that area. So that's kind of the public health. And as it happens, a lot of us in the team, in the Hyfe team, have a public health background. So it's an area where we feel a lot of affinity with. There's a lot of work that we do in TB and in other kind of public health respiratory areas. The other one is just like pharma and just innovation.
Sure.
Particularly around medical innovation. One thing that blew my mind is when I found out that there hasn't been an antitussive approved by the FDA since the late 50s, 1958 or something. Now, do you think we reached peak cough science in the 50s?
No.
I don't think so. So what happened is between the 50s and now, what changed is our scientific standards. Like now, these days, you have to generate evidence that is very rigorous.
Right.
Around, you have a claim, you have a new drug, right? You're claiming, oh, this drug will help you stop coughing. But generating that evidence is really hard if you can't measure cough.
Yeah.
Right? You can't say, hey, you can't go to the regulator, to the FDA and say, hey, look, I've got 10,000 patients who claim that they cough less because they took my medication. They will just throw you out. You can't do that. And because you can't measure cough, you can't generate that evidence, which means there hasn't been any innovation in cough medicine in 70 years. And that's crazy because if you start coughing now, you have two choices. You either get a placebo drug, some sort of syrup or something, or you get a highly toxic drug, or both. You get basically something that gives you a lot of adverse events and it's just placebo. It doesn't actually work. And by bringing an ability to measure cough and to understand frequency, we're actually building ways to customize management of cough, right? Like we can see how whatever you do to fix your cough, whether it's you controlling external variables, you understanding what the triggers are, or you're following some sort of treatment, we can see in real time if that treatment works or not. And then you have, for the first time ever, you have input-output type dynamics when you manage cough, which is it's something that should happen. It's crazy that it isn't in 2023, but just coughers don't get the benefit of data-driven decision-making in their clinical.
Yeah. Being that it's such an innovative technology and you're in a lot of kind of almost like a blue ocean of opportunity, what are some of the biggest risks that you face as a company then? If you kind of see you're building a playbook, you have the roadmap, you're getting a lot of adaptability, what's the particular risk that you see in terms, whether it's external or internal, while you're kind of building towards this eventual future?
So funnily enough, I see very little risks with our products. Like I think the technology is sound. I think our thesis, our assumptions are proven. I mean, meanwhile, we have global scale. We have tens of thousands of people using our technology every day. We have big corporate partnerships. So the product and the market, which usually would be the big risks innovation, I feel very confident about. What I think where our risks are in the fact that we actually we're kind of category defining. So then when you talk to investors, you have to convince them that there's a category there, which is very different from saying, look, I run a SaaS and here are my numbers and my month-on-month growth is this. And they can extrapolate in their Excel sheet what your valuation is. if I go and talk to an investor and say, look, I'm building this blue ocean thing and there's a lot of people that are excited about it and here's our traction, but how do you evaluate that? How do I get, like, the investor, particularly at the beginning, is going to give me 5 minutes of their time.
Yeah.
How do I use those 5 minutes to get them to see the opportunity? And some of these challenges are quite interesting, but I enjoy these challenges because it forces us to kind of simplify our thinking, to focus on what's important. So
Yeah.
I actually bring it on. Like I'm happy to have this sorts of problem rather than, oh, no one wants my product, or, oh, my technology doesn't work. So we're having small, we're having good problems to have.
Yeah. But even just thinking about the pitching process, I haven't, you're probably the first founder I've asked, but kind of, where do you start the story? Where do you start the journey when you're communicating the value of the product? Do you communicate with the evidence that you find, or the personal journey? Do you communicate by the ability of the technology? Like, where do you start when starting to
Hard.
build that journey? Yeah.
It's a hard question. This meme with the bell curve of intelligence, that meme?
Yeah.
Like that. So think about that meme, and on the left you have first, be very simple in your communication, and it's basically the theme. And then you have like the high IQ, be very complex, be very nuanced in your communication. And then you go down to the Jedi, and it's be very simple. That's kind of that. That's kind of where you have to be. Is like, and it's a process, right? So what's interesting is, over the last year, something happened in the world, which is just AI became so obvious, the value of AI, and it became so obvious how fast you can build things with AI, that we have a change in our narrative, which is beneficial to us. Before, a lot of our narrative was built around the power of AI. Hey, we build these AI tools that find signal in the sound. Now I don't actually have to build a narrative about AI, because I can finally focus on the value that we're creating. And this is the first time in this company that I can do that as someone who pitches to investors. So I see that as a huge piece of progress for us, because I don't have to sit in front of an investor and tell them, look, AI can find patterns in sound. They get it. And actually they're excited because investors are very much following trends, just like everybody else, right? They're following the trend. So now I can stop talking about AI, which is a hard thing to talk about.
Yeah.
And just talk about value. And then when the conversation comes to how are you delivering this value and how does your technology work, that means we're already past the point where the value is obvious, the opportunity is obvious, and we're in a place where we can go into more nuanced conversation. So I feel that the big trend and kind of the popularity of AI is working again in our favor.
Yeah. I guess if everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Hyfe?
Well, we're redefining the way that you approach cough at the moment, which means that we're redefining the way that you approach respiratory health, which means that we define the way in which you think about health. And we're kind of unlocking this whole category of signal, which is sound-based. It's very exciting.
Yeah. I love this next section. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and we'll see where we go.
Yeah.
Cool. I always like to open it up. What's particularly hard about your job day to day?
Well, I'm part of a team that's very scrappy. So there's a lot of things that we're doing. And I think the hardest thing is finding the focus to do kind of deep work. It's really, really hard, but it's part of the game.
Yeah. What's something that you least like doing, and what's something that you really enjoy doing in terms of part of the business?
There's a lot of admin overheads that I really don't like doing.
Yeah.
Like, I love 5 minutes meeting. I love canceled meetings. Yeah. It's just like, it's very, very hard to allocate my bandwidth. And I think everybody in the early stages has this problem. And you realize that bandwidth is one of the few zero-sum games that you're playing, and is super important to prioritize, to be kind of ruthless in your prioritization.
Yeah. Thinking about one thing you said earlier is the ICP, the individuals that, really kind of find the value out of that. When you communicate value to, say, a consumer to be able to, say, adopt the technology, allow it to use your microphone, that's something that's, at least in the US, that a lot of individuals struggle with, is how much of my information do I really care to opt in? And how frequently do I care to be opted into having an app collect information? How have you been able to kind of surpass that and communicate simply the value of understanding not only your personal kind of cough, but also your external environment, how that affects. How have you been able to build that trust? Is it education? What vehicles allow you to build trust with your consumers?
So, I mean, I think the best way to build trust is by just building trustful technology. And
Yeah.
like for example, we're running all our models on edge now, which means that there's no data leaving your phone. And that's good enough for most people. But I will say something that's kind of a hot take on this,
Yeah.
which is the friction that comes with, oh my God, someone's listening to my phone, which normally would be super dangerous when you build a consumer product. It works in our favor because it's a segmentation filter. I know for sure that people who bother to download our product and use our technology really need what we're providing.
Yeah.
So this is how I make sure that our users are all coughers, right? As opposed to just random people who are curious about what this is all about. And this is something that in the long term works in our favor because we work with a highly motivated segment of people. And yes, initially our growth was a bit slower. And yes, initially we had a few issues, but that means that we know more about coughers now than anyone. I can make this claim with full confidence. We know more about coughers than anyone on this planet. And that includes large pharma companies because we actually have a lot of coughers that we talk to every day, and we adjust the way that they interact with our product and our technology based on what they need to see and how they want to use that in their daily lives. And that's very valuable to us as a company.
Yeah. Thinking about the capabilities and building out a playbook outside of what you're doing now to Hype, what would you use the playbook if you weren't kind of keeping track of coughers and doing everything around cough and public health? What would you use the playbook for in terms of utilizing the sensors in mobile if you weren't working on Hype right now?
So I think that the biggest part of the playbook that I would utilize again and again is the fact that we have managed, AI is based, like the quality of your AI depends on the quality of the training data set, right? If you have a bad data set, your AI will, and this is a huge challenge. And actually a reason why very few companies play in sound AI in particular, because you see an LLM or sort of like a general purpose AI can be trained on data from the internet, which is huge, enormous.
Yeah.
But sound, how do you train on sound? Like how do you train your first model on sound? You have to create this sound. And then what happens is your typical team will go to their friends and say, hey, Julian, please generate this sound for me, cough once or whatever. And then your first model will be built on a highly biased data set, and it will work in that data set. But the moment you take it in the wild, it's just going to be crazy. Like those early generation of Twitter bots who just became racist after like 3 days.
Yeah.
It's exactly the problem. There's inherent bias in the way that you train your model. We've done something completely different, which is we have created value for consumers from day one. And against the advice of kind of senior experienced people, we built a consumer product, although we had no plan of monetizing that. And in a very short while, we had people in 150 countries downloading our product and using which means that our training data set is now 700 million samples of sound collected over 150 countries, collected in every possible acoustic environment you can imagine, collected across every social demographic segment you can imagine, and collected on every combination of hardware, software, user behavior, which means that our model works in the real world with a very, very high performance. And actually, I can send you a link where you can test it without any optimization. It just works on your machine, whatever your machine is, straight in the browser.
Yeah.
Which means that we're ready for scale and we're ready for the real world.
Yeah. What's one thing that you haven't seen your Hype's data utilized that you would like to see it outside of obviously public health, individuals knowing themselves, but what's one kind of use case that hasn't been necessarily prevalent yet that you're particularly excited about? Anything come to mind?
So I'm very tempted to tell you because we're actually working on something. But I have to be careful to not tell you too much. Is that there's been a lot of innovation if you think about the journey of someone who gets sick. There's been a lot of innovation on the sides, like, here's a better way to communicate to your doctor. Here's a better way to send your data to the doctor. But fundamentally, very little has been disrupted in that space. You still have to travel to see some person who's very busy and they're going to give you 15 minutes. And already That's slowly changing. AI in particular is going to change that. Then you go to diagnostic. You still have to go to a laboratory and take a sample of data, which is true on the Tuesday at 9 a.m. when you took it, but it tells you nothing about what happened before or after, right? So bringing longitudinal data there is what we're doing, and it's super exciting, right? Because now the diagnostic, your ability to judge what's going on as a doctor with a patient evolves with the way that patient evolves every day or every hour or every minute, right? And finally, you come to treatment where for hundreds of years, the treatment is, here's a substance, please ingest this substance, right? What if software can change that? What if we have a way to use less of this external substance that you're taking, which is designed to work in a kind of a broad spectrum? And what if we build something custom? Because now we know how Julian's body sounds, which means that we can infer what's going on inside there. What if we can build some sort of custom treatment for Julian that works only for him, but it works so good that he's going to be healthier sooner at a lower cost to everyone? And I think that's possible. And I won't say more, but it's an exciting opportunity there.
Yeah. It's exciting to see how sophisticated information can be after a certain, obviously, amount of data is collected, and how uniquely tied to an individual it can be. And it really kind of opens the eyes of the possibilities on how to not only kind of utilize the tools and technology we have, but also the information we have, and kind of marry that too. So excited to see kind of how that's been. You've made leaps and bounds of progress, at least in sound and AI and coughing, but how much more you can extrapolate that across different use cases and things like that. But I always like to ask this next question, just because I love how founders extract knowledge out of anything that they ingest. If it was early in your career now, but what books or people have influenced you the most?
So I mean, like everybody, I had my phase when I was consuming a lot of management books. And I mean, I think that there were a few early on that had a big impact on me. I mean, The Blue Ocean is one of them. Must be like mid-2000s when this book came out. But I think that there's a lot of, it's a space that has created a lot of noise. In fact, we probably did an AI to extract the useful information from all this content that's being built to advise startups. But I think that you can boil, probably the most impactful thing I've done and I continue to do, and I'm trying to keep doing it, is just ship. It's a stupidly simple thing, but it's very, very easy, particularly when you work with sophisticated technology, with innovation. It's very easy to get sucked in trying to overcomplicate things or trying to over-design them. So I just boil it all down to just, if you can ship every week, you're good. And even if you ship some monstrous quality in the first few weeks, you're going to learn very, very quickly what to improve. So that's kind of my mantra. Just like go out there with very, very low level of quality or fidelity, and just keep improving.
Yeah. I know we're at the end of the show here, so I always like to make sure that we didn't leave anything on the table. Is there any question, Julian, that I didn't ask you that I should have, or anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to touch on before we end the conversation today?
I mean, just super happy to. I really enjoyed this conversation, Julian. And I'd be super happy to provide details, connect with anyone who takes an interest in what we're doing, and try to see how I can provide value to the community.
Absolutely. And Julian, I love to always ask this at the end. Where can we find you? Give us your LinkedIn, your Twitters, your websites. Where can we not only support you as
I have a LinkedIn. You probably will share the links in the show notes. I'm on Twitter, I_Circo. And I'm looking forward to connect with anyone.
Amazing. Julian, it's been such a pleasure. Yeah. It's such a pleasure learning about your early experience, and also kind of what are the interesting, exciting ways that you're innovating and with Hyfe, and how you're really able to offer a different depth of information that has really kind of been missing, especially with previous documentation, previous practices, but tying technology into it to really increase the effectiveness and also the speed at which we can understand the information output of not only ourselves, but our external environment. It's only going to be exciting to see you grow more and see what kind of other technology you're able to kind of integrate and adapt on. But it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I hope you enjoyed yourself today, and thank you again for joining us on Behind Company Lines.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Of course.